They told her to strip for a standard inspection. Could this quiet contractor hide a shocking secret? Laughed as she unzipped her coveralls, elbowed each other, whispered filth under their breath. One even raised his phone pretending to check the time. But when she turned around, the cipher on her waist came into view. That stopped the unit commander cold. And in that moment, he didn't just stop the abuse. He made an example. Want to know what that cipher meant? And how it saved her dignity from being stripped away? Then hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because abuse of women in uniform isn't just wrong, it deserves consequences. The morning sun was already mean by 1,000 hours, turning the forward staging area into a furnace of dust and diesel fumes. Heat shimmers danced off the hoods of armored transports, lined up like sleeping giants, their metal skin too hot to touch with bare hands. The air tasted of burnt fuel in that particular cocktail of sweat and machinery that clung to every forward operating base from here to the Afghan border. Layla Roar moved through it all with the kind of easy stride that came from years of walking through worse places than this. Her coveralls hung loose on a frame that was leaner than it looked, muscles earned through necessity rather than vanity. Gray, threading through dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had seen better days. Steel-toed boots that showed the kind of wear you got from walking on everything from concrete to sand to surfaces that didn't officially exist. She carried a clipboard in one hand and a worn toolbox in the other, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't need to prove it to anyone. The name tape on her coveralls read lore in faded black letters, but no rank insignia, no unit patch, just another contractor in a sea of uniforms. That should have made her invisible. Instead, it made her a target. A cluster of soldiers lounged in the shade of a supply trailer, their conversation dying as she passed. The way conversations always died when something interesting walked by. Eyes tracked her movement with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with professional interest. "Check out the new logistics queen," one of them muttered loud enough to carry. "Bet she got that job interview on her knees." Another laughed. "Those coveralls are doing some serious work hiding the merchandise. Wonder if she's got daddy issues or just likes playing with the big boys." Isla kept walking. She'd heard it all before in a dozen languages, and twice as many accents. The words changed, but the tone never did. Men who thought volume equaled authority, and crude comments passed for humor. She reached the first vehicle on her inspection list, a Humvee with desert camouflage worn thin by sand and sun. The manifest showed it was cleared for deployment, but something felt wrong about the way it sat too low in the back, like it was carrying more weight than the paperwork claimed. She crouched beside the rear axle, running her fingers along the suspension mounting. The metal was warm, but not from the sun. Someone had been working on this vehicle recently. Fresh tool marks on the bolts, oil stains that hadn't been there long enough to collect dust. A shadow fell across her work area. She looked up to find a young private watching her with the kind of intensity that meant he'd been told to keep an eye on her. "You need something, soldier?" The private, his name tape read Morrison, shifted uncomfortably. "Just making sure you have everything you need, ma'am." She studied his face. 19, maybe 20, fresh out of basic training, probably still writing letters home about how proud his parents should be. The kind of kid who followed orders without questioning them, even when those orders came from someone like Beckett. "Have you ever worked on vehicle suspension before?" she asked. "No, ma'am. I'm infantry." "Then you might want to look at this." She pointed to the mounting points. "See how the brackets are bent? That's a stress fracture. Happens when you overload a vehicle beyond its design specifications." Morrison knelt beside her, genuinely curious now. "Is that bad? Bad enough to get you killed if it fails during a convoy run?" She pulled out a small flashlight and aimed it at the axle housing. "See that crack? Hairline now. But give it another 100 miles of rough terrain and this whole assembly could snap." The kid's face went pale. "Should I report this?" "I'm going to. But someone authorized these modifications. Someone who thought they knew better than the engineers who designed this system." Morrison glanced around nervously. Staff Sergeant Beckett said, "You were probably just stirring up trouble." Staff Sergeant Beckett is about to learn the difference between authority and competence. Problem, sweetheart? The voice came from behind her, heavy with the kind of authority that young men wore like cologne. She turned to find a staff sergeant standing with his arms crossed, two privates flanking him like backup dancers. His name tape read Beckett, and his uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut glass. "Suspension's been modified," she said, straightening. "Recent work not logged in the maintenance record." Beckett's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "And you would know because? Because I've been inspecting military vehicles since before you learned to tie your boots." One of the privates snorted. Big talk from someone who doesn't even rate a uniform. Isla met his eyes. "I earned my stripes in places your security clearance doesn't reach." "Sure you did," Beckett said, taking a step closer. "Let me guess. Desk job at some rear echelon motor pool, stamping papers and pretending to know what real soldiers do." She pulled out her inspection log and made a notation. "This vehicle fails inspection. Unauthorized modifications, no documentation. Grounded until someone with actual authority can explain why the rear suspension's been reinforced for a combat load in a supply convoy." Beckett's smile vanished. "You don't have the authority to ground anything, lady. You're a contractor. You make suggestions. We make decisions. Then decide why your vehicle's been modified to carry twice its rated load without proper documentation." The staff sergeant's jaw tightened. Behind him, the two privates shifted nervously. They'd been expecting some easy entertainment, not a pissing contest with someone who actually knew what she was talking about. Morrison appeared at Beckett's shoulder, his face troubled. "Sergeant, she's right about the suspension. I saw the crack she was talking about. It looks pretty bad." Beckett spun on him. "Nobody asked you, Morrison. Get back to your post." "But Sergeant," "I said get back to your post." The kid retreated, but not before shooting Layla, a look that said he understood what was really happening here. One person trying to do their job, and another trying to protect their ego at everyone else's expense. "You see what you've done?" Beckett said, turning back to her. "You've got my men questioning my authority, creating discord in the ranks. That's insubordination by proxy. That's called having standards." Isla replied evenly. "Something you might want to look into." "Maybe we should check your qualifications," Beckett said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "Make sure you're authorized to be asking questions about military equipment. Could this inspection turn into a nightmare?" The afternoon klaxon cut through the desert air like a razor, its electronic shriek echoing off the concrete barriers and prefab buildings. Yellow warning lights began flashing across the staging area, and the metallic voice of the base PA system crackled to life. "Fuel bay sensor alert zone 4. All personnel maintain safe distance until hazard assessment complete." Isla looked up at the warning lights, then back at Beckett. Zone 4 was her inspection area, the fuel bay where she'd been working not 20 minutes ago. She'd left that system armed and secured. Safety protocols followed to the letter. "That's your zone," Beckett said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Looks like someone made a mistake." She walked toward the fuel bay, Beckett and his men trailing behind her. The sensor panel was flashing red, indicating a potential hazard. But when she checked the readouts, everything showed normal. No leak detected, no pressure variance, no actual danger, just an alert that shouldn't exist. "Funny thing about these sensors," Beckett said conversationally. "They're really sensitive. Sometimes they go off when unauthorized personnel tamper with them." "This is a false alarm," Isla said, studying the display. "Someone triggered it manually." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her inspection photos from earlier. The fuel bay control panel clearly shows all systems armed and secure. The timestamp read 10:47 a.m. The alarm had triggered at 11:23 a.m., 36 minutes after she'd left the area. "I documented the system status. When I finished my inspection," she said, showing Beckett the photos. Everything was secured and functional. He barely glanced at the screen. "Photos can be doctored. Timestamps can be verified through the base security system." "That's a serious accusation." One of the privates said, "You saying we sabotaged military equipment?" "I'm saying someone who doesn't understand the system activated an alarm to create a pretext for harassing a contractor." Beckett stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the small scar above his left eyebrow. Or maybe someone who's been lying about her qualifications finally made a mistake and doesn't want to admit it. More soldiers were gathering now, drawn by the combination of the alarm and the raised voices. She recognized a few faces from earlier, the ones who'd been making comments about her appearance, about her qualifications, about what she was really doing here. "I don't make mistakes with fuel systems. Everyone makes mistakes," he said. "The question is, what do we do about it?" A new voice cut through the tension. "What's the situation here?" Isla turned to see a female sergeant approaching. Older, more experienced, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd been doing this job long enough to know when something wasn't right. "Just a routine inspection following a sensor alert." "Sergeant Hayes," Beckett said smoothly. Hayes looked at the fuel bay display, then at Layla. "Is this your area of responsibility?" "Yes, Sergeant." "And you're confident the system was properly secured when you left?" "I have documentation." Hayes studied the photos on Layla's phone, then walked to the control panel and ran through a quick diagnostic. "System shows manual override at 11:23 hours. That's operator initiation, not equipment failure." Beckett's jaw tightened. "Could have been activated by tampering." "Could have been," Hayes agreed. "But it wasn't. This is a deliberate activation." She looked at Beckett with the kind of expression that said she'd seen this game before. "You want to explain why someone would manually trigger a false alarm? According to base protocol," Beckett continued, ignoring the question, "when there's a potential safety violation involving unauthorized personnel, we're required to conduct an immediate inspection of the equipment," Isla said. "Of the person who may have caused the violation." The circle tightened slightly. She could hear whispered conversations, phones being pulled out, and the subtle shift in atmosphere that happened when spectacle was about to become sport. "You're talking about a body search," she said flatly. "I'm talking about the following procedure. Unless you've got something to hide." She looked around the circle of faces. Young men mostly. Some curious, some hungry for entertainment, a few uncomfortable but not willing to speak up. No senior officers in sight. No women. Just her, and a pack of soldiers who decided she was fair game. "I don't consent to a search," she said. "Then you can wait in detention until someone with proper authority can sort this out," Beckett replied. "Could be hours, could be days. Depends on how backed up the system is." One of the privates held up a clipboard. "Or you could sign a voluntary compliance waiver. Makes it go faster." The waiver was already filled out, like they'd prepared it in advance. Like they'd been planning this moment since she'd challenged Beckett's authority over the vehicle inspection. Isla stared at the clipboard. She could refuse, could demand to speak to a superior officer, could cite regulations and lodge complaints, and fight the system through proper channels. But she'd been fighting the system her whole career, and sometimes the only way to win was to let them think they'd won first. "Hand me the pen," she said. The signature felt like signing a death warrant, but she did it anyway. Quick, precise strokes that committed her to whatever came next. When she handed the clipboard back, Beckett's smile was pure predator. "Appreciate your cooperation," he said. "Now, if you could remove your outer garments for inspection." The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Around them, the circle of soldiers shifted, some moving closer, others pulling out phones. The fuel bay alarm continued its electronic shriek, but nobody was paying attention to that anymore. Isla reached for the zipper of her coveralls with steady hands. No trembling, no hesitation, just the calm precision of someone who'd learned to compartmentalize fear and use it as fuel. The zipper came down with a soft whisper of metal teeth, revealing a gray t-shirt underneath. Standard issue, faded from too many washings, clinging to a frame that was all muscle and sharp angles. She pulled the coveralls down to her waist and stood there with her arms at her sides, meeting Beckett's eyes without flinching. "Satisfied?" she asked, turn around." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Made it about more than just procedure and protocol. Made it about power and humiliation, and the kind of casual cruelty that small men inflicted when they thought they could get away with it. "Turn around," Beckett repeated, his voice harder now. Full inspection. She turned slowly, deliberately, like she was following orders she'd been given by someone who actually had the authority to give them. The t-shirt was thin, worn soft by time and use, and it clung to her back in a way that revealed everything beneath, including the mark just above her waistband. It wasn't a tattoo. Not exactly. It was something else entirely. A cipher burned into skin with precision that spoke of military discipline and careful planning. 3 elements arranged in perfect symmetry. A downward-pointing trident collapsed into a diamond shape. The numbers 942 beneath it in stark black digits. And below that, barely visible above her beltline, the silhouette of a bird of prey with wings spread wide. Most of the soldiers didn't know what they were looking at. Just some old ink from some old deployment. Probably gotten drunk in some overseas bar with too much money and too little sense. But the cipher wasn't decorated. It was a designation. The kind of mark that certain units gave to certain people who'd done certain things in certain places that officially didn't exist. And Staff Sergeant Beckett was about to learn that some marks meant more than others. Could this mark change everything? That's when the Humvee engines cut through the afternoon heat, low and rumbling and getting closer. Multiple vehicles moving fast across the desert hardpan. The sound of convoy movement, but not scheduled convoy movement. Colonel Arthur May stepped out of the lead vehicle before it had fully stopped. His desert camouflage uniform is dark with sweat, and his expression darker still. 2 military police followed him, their hands resting casually on their sidearms. He took in the scene with a single glance. The half-dressed woman, the circle of soldiers with phones out, the fuel bay alarm still shrieking its electronic warning, the clipboard with the signed waiver, and then his eyes found the cipher on Layla's back. The blood drained from his face. "Jesus Christ," he whispered so quietly that only the people closest to him could hear, then louder. "What the hell is going on here?" Beckett snapped to attention, his confidence evaporating like water on hot concrete. "Sir, conducting a routine safety inspection following a fuel bay alert. The contractor may have tampered with it." "Stand down, Sergeant." Mace's voice carried the kind of authority that came from making life and death decisions in places where mistakes got people killed. Right now, he walked closer, his eyes never leaving Isla's back. The cipher was clearly visible now, stark black against pale skin. 3 elements that told a story most people weren't cleared to read. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you can get dressed." She nodded once and began pulling her coveralls back up, zipping them with the same calm precision she'd used to remove them. No anger, no embarrassment, no demand for explanations. Just the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured worse things than public humiliation and learned to survive them all. When she was fully dressed, May stepped close enough that his next words were meant for her alone. "Shadow Support Team 942, he said softly. "Logistics Blackout Cell. Disbanded under classified protocols. March 2022. "Officially," Isla replied, "there are no official records of your unit's operations." That was the point. Mace pulled out a secure tablet, scanning the cipher with its built-in verification system. The screen flashed green, confirming what he already knew. The woman standing in front of him wasn't just a contractor. She was a ghost. The kind that defense departments created when operations went sideways and heroes needed to disappear for the good of national security. He turned to face the assembled soldiers, his expression carved from stone. "Anyone who recorded this will delete that footage immediately or face federal charges for recording classified personnel without authorization." Phones disappeared back into pockets with the speed of guilty consciences. The circle of spectators began to dissolve, men suddenly remembering they had duties elsewhere. "Sergeant Beckett," May said, his voice carrying across the staging area. You're under arrest for abuse of authority and violation of classified personnel protocols. The military police moved forward, but Beckett stepped back, his hands raised. Sir, I was just following procedure. The fuel bay alarm was manually triggered to create a pretext for harassing a contractor whose security clearance is higher than mine. Mace's smile was sharp as a knife blade. Did you think we wouldn't check? The MPs cuffed Beckett with a kind of professional efficiency that spoke of too much practice. His fellow soldiers watched in silence, finally understanding that they'd been part of something that went far beyond simple harassment. The rest of you, Mace continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the staging area, will report to the base commander's office at 1:400 hours for mandatory briefing on proper treatment of classified personnel. Anyone who discusses what happened here will be washing dishes in the mess hall until their enlistment expires. As the soldiers dispersed, Mace turned back to Isla. She was standing quietly beside the fuel bay, her clipboard in her hands, waiting for permission to return to work. You could have identified yourself, he said, and compromised operational security. She shook her head. My cover is more important than my pride. Your cover nearly got you sexually assaulted by a punk with delusions of authority. I've survived worse. The simple way she said it made Mace's chest tighten. He'd seen the classified files on Shadow Support Team 942, knew about the operations that never happened in places that didn't exist against enemies the government would never acknowledge, knew about the helicopter that went down behind enemy lines and the 3 operators who made it back against impossible odds. Sergeant Hayes approached, her expression troubled. Sir, I need to report that the fuel bay alarm was manually triggered. No equipment failure, no safety violation. Someone activated it deliberately. Any idea who? Hayes glanced toward the detention vehicle where Beckett was being held. System logs show the override code was entered, using Staff Sergeant Beckett's access credentials. Mace's jaw tightened. So he sabotaged military equipment to create a pretext for harassment. Yes, sir. That's a federal offense. Make sure that's included in his charges. Mace looked at Isla. You want to press charges? I want to finish my inspection and file my report. Same as any other day after what just happened. Especially after what just happened. Hayes cleared her throat. Ma'am, if I may. What you did back there. Not backing down even when things got ugly. That took guts. It took patience. Isla corrected. Sometimes the best way to win is to let the other side expose themselves. I'm going to remember that. And that told him everything he needed to know about who she really was. For the next 3 hours, Isla worked with the kind of quiet competence that made experienced officers take notice. She didn't just inspect equipment. She understood it, knew which components carried stress, and which were just for show. Could spot potential failures that wouldn't show up on diagnostic equipment for months. She found the unauthorized modifications to the Humvee's suspension system, traced them back to off-books requisitions that someone had been using to prepare vehicles for missions that weren't on any official schedule, discovered a pattern of maintenance shortcuts that could have resulted in catastrophic failures during combat operations. Morrison found her examining the engine compartment of the 3rd vehicle in the convoy, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed this same inspection under fire. Ma'am, he said hesitantly, I wanted to apologize for earlier. I should have spoken up when Sergeant Beckett was, when he was out of line. She looked up from the engine block, oil stains on her hands, but her expression was understandable. You're young, Morrison, and he's your sergeant. That's a difficult position to be in. Still doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. But you're learning that's what matters. She pointed to a hydraulic line that looked fine to Morrison's untrained eye. See this connection? Looks solid, right? But feel the temperature difference between this line and the one next to it. Morrison pressed his palm against the metal. This one's warmer. That's because it's working harder than it should. The seal is starting to fail. Give it another week, and you'll have hydraulic fluid spraying across the engine compartment during operation. How did you know just by looking? Experience. The fact that whoever did the suspension modifications didn't recalibrate the hydraulic system to compensate for the additional load. It's a rookie mistake, that'll get people killed. Morrison watched her work with growing respect. You really did serve overseas, didn't you? I did in combat. Isla was quiet for a moment, her hands still working on the engine. There are different kinds of combat, Morrison. Sometimes the most dangerous battles are the ones nobody ever hears about. Sergeant Hayes appeared beside them, tablet in hand. I've been documenting her findings, she told Morrison. 3 critical safety violations, 2 maintenance oversights, and 1 case of equipment tampering. All even vehicles that were scheduled for deployment tomorrow. Jesus, Morrison breathed. We could have been killed. That's the point, Isla said, wiping her hands on a rag. Equipment doesn't care about your ego or your rank. It just works, or it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, people die. Word spread through the base in the way that important lessons always did. Through duty shifts and maintenance briefings, through NCO meetings and casual conversations over coffee. Not the gossip version of what happened, but the lesson version. The quiet ones have stories too. Respect is earned through competence, not volume. And sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to tell you how dangerous they are. By the time Ela finished her inspection, the staging area had returned to its normal rhythm of maintenance and preparation. But something had changed in that space. The casual harassment had stopped. The crude comments had died away. The young soldiers worked with a new understanding that competence came in many forms. And some of those forms had earned the right to move through the world without being questioned by people who never walked in their boots. Master Sergeant Williams, a 30-year veteran who'd seen more combat than most people could imagine, found her as she was packing up her tools. Ma'am, he said quietly, good work today. Coming from Williams, that was high praise. The kind that got repeated in maintenance meetings and remembered during performance reviews. Thank you, Sergeant. Are you planning to come back? She shouldered her toolbox and looked out across the staging area, where young soldiers were preparing for missions that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves. Someone has to make sure their equipment works, she said simply. Yes, ma'am. Someone does. Morrison appeared beside them, his uniform still dirty from helping with the vehicle inspections. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for teaching me about the hydraulics, and for showing me what real leadership looks like. Real leadership is about protecting the people who can't protect themselves, she said. Remember that when you make sergeant. I will. As she walked toward the gate, Colonel Mace fell into step beside her. They moved in comfortable silence through the desert heat. 2 professionals who understood the weight of the work they did. You know, he said finally, I could arrange for you to work with less challenging personnel. Then how would they learn? Learn what? She paused at the gate, looking back at the base where young men were learning to become soldiers. That the people who keep them alive don't always look like what they expect. 3 days later, Morrison was promoted to specialist. Not because of what happened with Isla, but because his performance had suddenly improved. His attention to detail had sharpened. His willingness to question unsafe procedures had grown. His respect for competence over rank had become a model for other young soldiers. Sergeant Hayes received a commendation for her handling of the fuel bay incident. Her quick thinking and professional conduct had prevented a potential assault and exposed equipment tampering that could have resulted in casualties. And Staff Sergeant Beckett was court-martialed for abuse of authority, equipment tampering, and violation of classified personnel protocols. His conviction carried a dishonorable discharge and a permanent bar from military service. But the real change was harder to measure. It lived in the way soldiers treated civilian contractors with respect instead of suspicion, in the way young NCOs learned to listen before they spoke, to ask questions before making assumptions, in the way the base developed a culture that valued competence over ego, results over rank. The guard who processed her exit was a senior NCO who'd seen enough classified operations to recognize certain kinds of ink when he saw it. He didn't ask questions, just nodded respectfully and handed back her credentials. Have a good day, ma'am. You too, Sergeant. 3 weeks later, when the next civilian contractor showed up for equipment inspection, the atmosphere in the staging area was different. Soldiers were professional courteous, and helpful. They asked about qualifications instead of making assumptions, offered assistance instead of obstacles. Because word had spread through the base in the way that important lessons always did, through duty shifts and maintenance briefings, through NCO meetings and casual conversations over coffee. Not the gossip version of what happened, but the lesson version. Treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Ask questions before making judgments. Remember that you never know who you're dealing with until it's too late to change your first impression. And sometimes the quiet ones have the most important stories of all. Have you ever seen someone underestimated because they chose to stay quiet? Do you think silence should be taken for weakness? Or is it sometimes the most powerful response? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for daily stories about the heroes hiding in plain sight. Share this with someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated. Another powerful story is waiting for you right now. Click it, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.